Okay. Well, I like when I can see you guys. Let's see. Okay. Well, we're just gonna go with it. Um, Sorry about that, guys. We are in week 8, which is wild to think. So this week we're going to cover beliefs and emotions as inputs, um, tying in some of the material that we learned last week, just as far as looking at the body as energy, and then just kind of keeping in same alignment with that notion. What is the input? What creates the output? Because even the mood we are in when we eat is going to play a role in how that gets digested. So we're going to cover strictly beliefs and emotions today, and then next week we're going to tie all the pieces together. One thing I wanted to touch on that was asked in last week was when we were talking about the first law of thermodynamics and speaking about energy not being created or destroyed, but only transferable. The definition that I had mentioned it being in a closed container. So I did a little more research and looking into kind of the systems open, closed, or isolated within physics. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but this is what kind of came through in my understanding of it. So these open systems are going to be when matter and energy are exchanged with its surrounding, meaning boiling water becomes vapor. Our metabolic, excuse me, systems are also considered open because we have this exchange of matter, food, oxygen, light, and then that is going to release waste and heat. Something I wanted to mention was the heat. Heat is required for us to maintain our body temperature, and actually 60% of our metabolic energy goes into maintaining that body temperature. So the processes that need to occur each day can. Looking at a closed system, this basically means that the matter is not exchanged with its surrounding, but the energy is. So if you think about a capped bottle, right, the water is held in the container, but there is still going to be energy, heat, or light. Again, if it is a lot of heat, then potentially you will still move that into an open system in some way, shape, or form because of either the pressure that gets built and then the resulting impact of that, and or just how that transference of water moves from a liquid to a gas based on the amount of heat, in which case then that matter is actually being exchanged with its surroundings. And then isolated means neither are exchanged. So matter is not exchanged, nor is energy exchanged. And as I was reading, what I was coming across was theoretically the entire universe is closed because the universe is all encompassing. So therefore, there is no technical surrounding that exists, right? When we think about surroundings, there's an inside and an outside, or an inner and an outer. And when we look at these isolated systems, or at least looking at the universe as an isolated system, um, that word should say the entire universe is isolated, not closed, excuse me, because it is all encompassing and it is limitless. There is technically nothing to surround it because it includes everything. So when you go into that type of theoretical framework, in that infinite universe, all potential is there. There is nothing there. And some of these words, the way that we traditionally use them versus the way they are used in physics or in other, I'm going to use the word jargon, but, technical language for certain professions or speaking to different theoretical frameworks. Nothing is there because the potential for everything in the quantum field exists there. So hopefully that makes sense. Even just kind of, in looking at closed and isolated, they were kind of speaking, it depends on who the individual is that's writing, correct? Some were saying closed and isolated don't exist. But if we hold that idea, right, even of the universe being isolated because it is all encompassing, therefore there is no exchange, that can be one of the foundational reasons as to why that first law of exchange, when it says it can transfer, but not be created or destroyed within the closed system exists. And so I wanted to just kind of tie that back into what I was speaking to with emotions, because that is one of the things that I've spoken to and shown some graphs of how emotions are connected to hertz and the variation in which those emotions or energy in motion can transmute and move. So if we perceive ourselves as that open energy system with the ability to change and transmute, right, the choices that we make are going to have an impact on our emotion because of the physiological impact of metabolic processes, blood sugar, quality of water. When we look at emotions, though, something else to consider and kind of looking at it from this open system framework, we can also look at emotions as the opportunity to work with belief systems. And so again, looking at emotions and thoughts today, I wanted to take some of this open, closed, and isolated and tie, just use that to kind of begin to tie into what we're going to be speaking to today. I used to have an image like this that basically spoke to the sensations in the body moving, being the foliage, the branches being the thought, the trunk being the attitude, and the core belief being the roots that run down. There are differences between thoughts and core beliefs. Thoughts are going to be things that we, recognize consciously that are going to be the way that we perceive or describe something, where core beliefs are going to be usually a little more unconscious, meaning we may not be aware that that core belief exists, but it's going to be something that's a little bit of a broader belief that suggests or has a very large interplay in how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see the world. So our thoughts can be rapid and they can shift, right? But these core beliefs are actually going to hold multiple thoughts. I love pictures like this, and especially the analogy of the tree when looking at belief systems, because I'm not going to say all trees because I don't know this for a fact, but most trees, I do know this about palm trees. The height of the tree is the length of the roots underground. And so when we can begin to recognize that what we see above is also what is below, right? The way that we are interacting with the world atop is going to reference our belief systems and the strength of those core beliefs. So just by definition, thoughts are considered active energies, vibrations, frequencies, and believed by many to create the reality we experience. You can see this in terms like law of attraction, right? What we put out is what we bring back in. Even the law of mentalism, which is in the Kabbalion. The aspect with this, though, that I would say is, yes, it can be our thoughts, but also it is our core belief systems and our unconscious thoughts, because even the law of mentalism speaks to the meditative mind. So you can be, right, holding a thought of like, I want this, but if internally, right, you hold a belief that that thing is bad, which then means you're bad or you're not capable of getting that, right, that's actually going to be the energy and the frequency that you are putting out, not just the thought that you are trying to make yourself believe. Roughly 90 to 95% of our daily thoughts are repetitive or old thoughts from previous days, and we have anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. So if we can really begin to recognize the majority of what we think is recycled and only a small amount of it is new, creative, or spontaneous, we can really start to take agency, not just for the quality of thoughts that we have in the moment and working with those, but also working with those core belief systems, right? Because those are actually going to be repetitive and old from previous days as well. One of the, we'll call it a law. One of the laws that we work with unknowingly is called confirmation bias. And that is the unconscious tendency to seek, interpret, and recall to confirm or validate pre-existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. This was identified by Peter Wason in probably like the 1960s. And when we work with this automatic process unconsciously, it has the ability to lead us to flawed decision making or overconfidence or being rigid or being emotionally charged because things from the past, right, if 90 to 95% of what we're thinking is recycled, we are using old information that has already happened to work with something in front of us. And through confirmation bias, if we are seeking basically to be right, we're going to ignore the things that may lead us in a different direction that would open us up to many potential changes. But ultimately, what I'll say is the limitation of that belief or the limitation of that emotion. When we can see that deeper invitation of not the past experience necessarily, but the learning and the meaning and the aspects behind it, we have the ability then to become more aware of our conscious thought process and work with situations and scenarios and experiences in front of us in a very different way. Overcoming confirmation bias truly does require a conscious effort to seek out disconfirming evidence. This is where I'll use the word truth, which can be very uncomfortable, right? Challenging one's assumptions, even just entertaining the possibility or entertaining the notion that one might be wrong, right? Um, I think one of the biggest times in my life that, I felt the most free was when I really started to recognize and understand, like, just because I think something doesn't mean that that's true. And what if everything I thought was wrong, right? It doesn't mean that something is wrong with me or I'm stupid or anything like that. But being able to just entertain that aspect of like, what if I'm wrong about that and there's another possibility? Right? That other possibility just opens doors for a lot of different experiences, right? So I mentioned in here, that right or wrong as far as the law of polarity, because what the law of polarity will speak to is our belief that two things that are opposite are different, when in actuality they are one and the same. They just differ in their degree of differentiation. Right. So what happens a lot in our culture is we have this divisiveness, right? Like one side, when in all actuality, they are the same, right? Even just think of something simple as like when you go to a wedding, right? Most of the time you find like if you're, a friend of the bride, you're going to sit on one side. And if you're a friend of the groom, you're going to sit on the other side, separate. But in all actuality, we have a union in front of us coming together, which means all of us are together. Um, Another question, just, do you like the experience you're creating? Referring back to that law of attraction. For those that truly believe that they are the creator of their experience and they truly believe in the power of the unconscious and those aspects that we've just talked to or spoken to, I invite the rhetorical question of what process do you have to lead yourself through to see what is being asked to be seen, because it's going to be different for every single person. And this is one of those things of therapy where we'll create buckets, right? Or, oh, work on this, work on this, work on this. And not to say those aspects aren't connected, but only each person, once they really start to work with their own experiences, are going to recognize and see the through line of the entirety of their life experience. Anybody else outside of it is going to have their own judgment, right? Based on their own, aspects of not living it and even their own personal confirmation bias. So when we drop into beliefs creating reality, right, we see a lot of language around subjective reality, self-fulfilling prophecies. Oftentimes we can see this as negative, right? But if this emphasizes a concept that your thoughts create your reality, how can you use this law to shift, right? We even think about, self-fulfilling prophecies in the sense of like, oh, I'm telling myself I'm going to go bomb that speech and then I get up there and I do terrible, right? But what if you actually spoke aloud like, I'm going to do really well today and people are going to be moved by what I have to say, not because I'm saying it, but because I'm letting it flow through me, right? Because those that are supposed to be here to hear this are here, and I have done enough preparation that I feel confident in my own self getting up there to speak. Saying that all out loud, right, is going to create an entirely different reality. So we tend to look at these laws and look at them in a way of like, again, oh, this thing is bad. When in all actuality, if we take a step back and remove those filters, we get to work with these processes that are inherent and innate in a very different way than what we have been culturally or traditionally taught to look at the thing as. One thing I want to highlight are beliefs in childhood, because I find this stuff super fascinating and not a lot of people know this. Most of there was a bird that just flew to my porch door and I let out that sigh because I thought my slider was open and it was very close to coming inside, but it is closed. Going back to beliefs in childhood. So from birth to about 7, our brains are predominantly in theta brainwave state, and that acts as hypnosis super learning, right? So when we look at children who are able to learn 3 languages at the same time, right? It's amazing what they take in because their brain development and the synapses that are being created are just, they're like a sponge. They take everything in, right? So they absorb information, behaviors, belief directly into their subconscious without critical filters, right? So this is going to facilitate rapid learning if it is used appropriately through play, imagination, emotion, rather than, other means that, societally maybe are encouraged. Um, if we know this, right, as adults, I want to just focus back to each individual in their own journey at this point. If we recognize that that experience from 0 to 7 is the brainwave state that we're in, and we get to absorb all of these things, what did we learn or experience as a child that we believe or believed at one point, but don't anymore? Right. So maybe we believed it and we don't anymore, or maybe we believe it, but we also recognize that that belief isn't necessarily supportive in helping us create or live how we want to experience the life that we're given. I speak to here, are there experiences related to family of origin, community, or culture that one may be unaware that they are holding, yet is still running? So this is when we all get to take that innate agency and curiosity of like, oh, right, what's operating? What's there that I'm not consciously aware of? If 90 to 95% of how I'm interacting right now is coming from my past, and I know that there is a large time in my life that there was no filter and things just came right on in. What do I need to look at and just start to question with love so that I can free myself from a limitation that I am continually placing on myself? Research really shows that around 30 to 35 is when the brain stabilizes its structure and reaches peak operational maturity. Ultimately, meaning that those belief systems, it doesn't mean that they're solidified and you can't change them. Everybody has the ability to change. It's all based on what you believe, right? But ultimately, we see that brain development really reach operational maturity around this time. So, any questions real fast before I keep going? No, perfect. Okay. We're going to come back on in. Um, so when we look at perception, cognition, and action within the human and the computer input, processing, output, I wanted to put this slide in here because if we can really start to look at that unconscious, right, as a processing aspect. Bethany talked about this in the Septions office hours that we did, where every input that comes in, all of them together, right, are going to move through how we perceive something. That's then going to play a role in the output. So perception and cognition is photo. Cognition, I question if that's necessarily the word that I want to use, but ultimately I'm showing this because if we can begin to see our experiences, right, or that unconscious as this automatic, kind of computer, right? We're considered this computer can go through updates and, things like that. If we actually take the time to pause to recognize that we also have the ability to change, right? How are our perceptions or our cognitions or what we're taking in creating the action or the output that we're experiencing, right? Especially again, if 90 to 95% is from the past or is hardwired, right? And I'm putting that word in quotes if you can't see me. What do we need to learn or know about our processing so that we can step into fuller agency? And so briefly, yeah, mention some of this stuff. That perception is how we perceive something. So it's actually, yeah, it is the input. Perfect. Those are going to be auditory, visual, proprioception, right? That's kind of just how the body orients itself as far as time and space. Taste, touch, the vestibular system is going to be that interoception, right? What the body is sensing in orientation to that proprioception, and smell. Cognition is going to be how we think, know, remember, judge, and problem solve. And one of the pieces about cognition that I wanted to speak to are something called schemas. And schemas are the brain's organized structures and blueprints that help us interpret information, categorize, or define information. So the analogy that I like to use a lot is if you were to ever see the movie Inside Out, right? And she has those yellow golden balls and then the islands. If you switch that analogy a little bit and think about the golden ball as the theme, and then the island as all of the information or memories, right? We have these structures in place where the brain is going to be able to pull from these past experiences, and that is technically what the top-down approach is considered. We'll get into that piece in a little bit. I did put in the slides, and I'll share this in the slide folder, Piaget's theory on schemas, because ultimately, again, right, as children with the brain developing, this is where that theta brainwave state, the unconscious, is really going to let the brain come in and do its innate organizing structure. But at some point, we have to go back and ask, is what I learned actually helpful, or is it what I actually believe in today? So bottom up, top down approach. Bottom up means that we're going to take in information, that raw sensory data from the environment. It's going to move through our nervous system. It's going to build up to those complex conceptual understandings. Again, Bethany spoke a lot about this in week 4 office hours. And then that top down is going to explain how the brain uses knowledge, expectation, past experience to interpret that sensory information. This is where those concept of schemas come in. And so even just looking at how memories are stored, right? This is a quick, relatively simple picture. We start with sensory input. That moves to the nervous system. There are 3 stages of memory. You have sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and then working memory. The reason short-term memory and working memory are in the same box is because they are in the same location. So I guess technically there's 4. But that sensory memory, is going to be what are we taking in from the environment that our nervous system is bringing in. The more we pay attention to it, the more it encodes, right? Meaning the neurons that fire together wire together. That bottom up is going to be part of that encoding where the brain is going to put the cognition to the thing last, and then we're going to be able to have the ability to speak about it. As we continue to pay attention, that information and all of the aspects of the sensory pieces that we talked about last slide are all going to move into long-term memory. So we're actually going to have, where did I talk about it? Here, audio, visual, proprioception, taste, touch, vestibular system, and smell. All of that is going to be taken into a memory, neurologically speaking. It's not like an actual file folder that we're pulling out and it's like, here's the memory. It's all neurological in nature. So even just going back to first and second week of how does a cell communicate, right? Because the firing of that information, the movement of that energy is how memories communicate. So in this long-term memory, I think it only takes about 14 seconds for this whole process to happen. It's pretty amazing. That short-term memory, I'm sorry, the working memory is limited, meaning it can only do so many things at one time, but that long-term memory is infinite. It has a unlimited amount of space. So we store everything, whether we consciously remember it or not. And then going just back to that top down, that long-term working memory, when we need to remember something or recall something, is going to come back into working memory. You can even see this in studies, and I don't have any of this for, the slides listed, but I'll find some and add some if this is of interest. But when we do like memory games, right? Or you give someone an activity, you show them a bunch of pictures, and it's like a recall, right? Tell me what you remember seeing. The working memory can hold about 7 pieces of information. So that, when you look at research where people are asking for numbers, it's easier for individuals to hold chunks of numbers to remember more numbers rather than hold individual numbers because each individual is going to be a unit.
Hey Megan, do you
Yeah.
mind resharing your screen?
Am I not sharing it?
It just like the last like 2 or 3 minutes. It was I wasn't sure if you were just wanting to have more of an intimate conversation, but yeah, the
No.
screen is not sharing.
Guys, I'm so sorry.
Okay, I think it was just like probably 2 or 3 slides.
Thank you for saying something because
Of course.
I don't know these things sometimes. And now let's see. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. So we got this one. Did you see perception?
No, we did not.
Okay. So this is the slide that I was speaking to, sorry, about office hours with Bethany and just how we can further understand this photo of input, what is processing, and then output. This is why I spoke about schemas and just kind of that structure's blueprint, bottom up, top down. So that bottom up is going to be us taking information in from the environment and building up to that complex, conceptual understanding. Top down is going to be how the brain uses that knowledge, expectation, and past experiences to interpret that sensory information, meaning that is going to be what is tied into the schema, right? So if we recognize that from that 0 to 7 age frame, where we are unconsciously taking in information because of how our brain develops and the vastness and quickness in which we absorb information. We can start to begin to really, with curiosity, as we kind of, you'll see as we go through some of the memory pieces, begin to uncover what's there that we don't know is there. This is the photo of memory that I was speaking to. So sensory input moves into sensory memory. That sensory memory, to short-term memory to long-term memory, working memory and short-term memory are in the same box because they occur in the prefrontal cortex. It takes about 14 seconds for this whole process to happen. So again, as we pay attention to those sensory inputs and the body innately says, you know, let's keep moving this up the chain of command, our cognition and the way that we perceive, perception is subcognition. So the actual cognition, the way we think about something, is going to be short term, because we're putting thoughts to it. Now we have long term memory, and that retrieval is going to be, when we are recalling something that is going to support us in doing something present day. And I think that is all we're at. So thank you again. Thoughts and core beliefs. So again, difference between thoughts and core beliefs, but sometimes they can, they might be used interchangeably depending on what you're reading. They can arise from memory through the reactivation of neural networks where stored information, sensory input, and emotional context combine to form that conscious thought. So if you remember even from week 1, right, when we talked about the HPA axis and the mid part of the brain, that mid part of the brain, if we're looking at how sensory information actually moves, we're taking that information into the spinal column and the brainstem, and then it's going to go from the brainstem to the midbrain, where there, and all of this kind of happens at the same time. So it's not necessarily like step 1, step 2, step 3 over the course of an hour. Like they all kind of happen instantaneously together. But this tends to be more of the flow when that animal brain says, okay, we can respond to this, right? That, or not from a flight standpoint, but this is safe, we can engage with it, excuse me. That midbrain is going to, because of the emotional connection to it with HPA axis, hypopituitary adrenal, and just what the midbrain does, it's going to connect to the body as far as what neurotransmitters, what hormones, what chemicals need to be released that are also going to support what is the emotional experience I'm having in this moment. And then we're going to move into that prefrontal cortex. So if you think about this as the brain, brainstem, midbrain, prefrontal cortex, to add in that conscious thought. Um, when we are activated by something in the environment stimulus wise, neurons are going to fire in very specific strength and patterns that are going to allow us to recall past experiences, to simulate scenarios or aid in decision making. So again, going back to that 90 to 95% of what we think and feel is from the past. if we can recognize that when we're engaging with something and the way that we're engaging with it, if we haven't worked with it before, it's likely from a past experience that is helping us aid in decision making. Excuse me, but that's also then where we have to pause and ask, is the way I'm approaching this actually helpful to me in this moment? So beliefs and emotions, I just say that they're going to be the invitation for us to really drop in and see what's running in the background. As I just mentioned, these emotional patterns are going to come with the automatic thoughts, which are going to be reinforced by memories and schemas. Joe Dispenza is the author of the book we're reading currently for this month. You cannot see the way out of a challenge if you are looking at it every day from the same level of mind, emotion, thoughts, and feelings from the past. And one of the deeper aspects that he speaks to that I didn't necessarily put in here, if you want something new, you have to allow it to come in an unexpected way. Because what we find is if we are trying to make something happen in accordance to the way that we already know how to do something, we're probably just going to recreate an experience unless we are actively engaged in a level of growth mindset where we are currently learning something and attempting to apply it. We'll get into that application of growth mindset and fixed mindset in just a minute. I want to kind of drop into conscious and unconscious because we've used those words a lot, and the photo I'm going to show you next, a lot of you have seen already, but it's one of my favorites. When we talk about 95% of what we do is unconscious, meaning that it is past. That unconscious mind is going to operate below our awareness. It's going to manage automatic habits, behaviors, deeply ingrained beliefs, repressed memories. It has an unlimited capacity, again, just like that long-term memory network system, whereas the conscious mind is much more involved in active awareness, logic, immediate decision making, representing what you are thinking about currently. And as I mentioned before, and the photo of the memory theory of how memories are made, that working memory does have a limited capacity. So a lot of you have probably seen this photo before. This is a Carl Jung photo, and I love it for a variety of reasons. But again, when we go back to that, 95% is unconscious, right? Think about your personal unconscious as that long-term memory network system. Think about that cultural unconscious as what has my culture or my environment outside of my family of origin reinforced to me and my family of origin. And then we have the collective unconscious, which a lot of you have probably heard me speak to, but it's this energetic, innate knowledge that exists within us that he says connects us back to the beginning of the human race. I want to just share this information that I found last night in a Telegram group that I'm in because I thought this was super fascinating and really tied into some of these aspects of that collective unconscious, considering, right, like DNA and like just the innate information that's in our cells. The gentleman put 1 gram of DNA can store up to 700 terabytes of data. This means your body has stored 13.5 billion years of data within its DNA. You are the universe, or should I say, the universe is within you. He then says, remember, energy can't be destroyed, it can only be transformed. You are literally a walking databank of history and knowledge connected to servers which can upload and download additional data. This data can be accessed by every one of us. And so I just thought that was really beautiful in connection to this, because when we can really, really deeply embody from the heart and the gut, remembering that we have so much wisdom and knowledge available to us, not just, what we learned in life or what school taught us, but the actual innateness that keeps us alive and breathing and functioning every day that we don't tell it to do, along with ancestral knowledge and all the hermetic laws, right? There's so much beauty in this recognition. Consciousness going above is going to be that physical world society. Persona literally means mask. Ego does not mean egotistical or narcissist. It means the beliefs of I. So again, what do I believe that reinforces who I think I'm supposed to be in this world? What is coming through underneath that experience that's inviting me to see what I've learned that I no longer resonate with, or I do resonate with. Again, it's that personal invitation to, in creating the life you want to live, Where are your thoughts and emotions limiting you from that experience? Do you believe that you have the ability to change or not? Um, Again, we'll get to those pieces in a minute, but just something, as far as working with memories, because memories can come up for a lot of people, obviously as we do tapping and things of that on Thursday, it's definitely possible that memories come up. If memories arise to replay thoughts and beliefs, ultimately to inform the unconscious mind, aka reinforce confirmation bias, what is a new way that we can work with memories to confirm new ways of thinking and experiencing rather than using the memory as a justification for why something is the way it is presently? If you need a moment to read that again and let that sink in, I want you just to sit with that for a moment. Again, we've been taught to look at memories as the reason something is happening rather than allowing ourselves to invite in the possibility that the memory is the metaphorical knock on the door, asking us to inquire what we have learned about ourselves, others, and the world. That maybe, just maybe, if we were to look at that experience differently, we get to learn something different as well. Um, One of the things here that I just kind of speak to, and you've heard me say this a lot, is when you see the law, the truth, or the system at play, you can work with it in a way that honors what it was designed to do, right? So even looking at nutrition and some of the digestive pieces that we did a few weeks ago, the diagnostic label that is given for something does not mean that the system is wrong. It means we get to go back and start to look at and question why that response is what it is. Can we start to do the same thing with memories? Can we start to inquire what it is that is being asked of us to see and use that law in a more helpful way? I guess I'm putting those words in quotes if you can't see me. This last piece, syntax study, I wanted to highlight this. Bethany talked about this in a course that I did with her. But words are incredibly powerful. And she was speaking about a study. I don't have the name of it. I'll see if I can find it. But basically, there were a bunch of people in line to make some copies at this printer. And a couple people would go in and ask if they could cut in front of the person in line. Some people said yes, some people said no, but they found that when the individual gave a reason, right? Oh, can I cut in front of you to make my copies because I have a dentist appointment. I have to take my son to school, whatever the reason. That word because I think increased the allowing of that person to cut in by over 50% because of that word. Because when we hear that word, it reinforces something. So rather than saying, I don't want to go on a run because I'm tired, right? How do you start to use that word because to reinforce doing things in your life, right? I get to cook my own food at home because I care about the nourishment I put into my body, right? Because I want to show myself a level of responsibility, dedication, whatever it is, right? But if we use that word because in the way, not that it was meant to use, right? But if we know the law behind it, we can use it in a way that works for us and our goals instead of using it to deter. So this is where that growth mindset versus fixed mindset slide clearly is. And I spoke about that a little bit ago. But a growth mindset, right, when we talk about this, like, are you open to learning something? That is literally a growth mindset. It's the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication, effort, and learning. This is hard and I can learn it. Mistakes help me improve, right? Student gets a poor grade, asks for feedback. Someone learning a new language says, I can't speak it yet, right? I'm learning. I will speak it one day. Whereas when we're in that fixed mindset, it assumes that talents and what we learn are innate and static. I'm not good at this, so I should stop, right? A person will skip a difficult task because they're afraid of failing in front of others because of how they view failure, right? Or how they view themselves. Someone may not try a new sport because they believe they're not athletic. So I'm going to leave this just as a rhetorical question unless there are questions. Even within these fixed beliefs, if you really look at, maybe not with your eyes, but with a different set of eyes, or you hear with a different set of ears, there are opportunities in these words to move so that a growth mindset or belief can be identified, right? So any belief that is limiting, you can take it, and we'll get into this in a couple slides. You can take it and through a process of automatic writing and journaling and inquiry, not thinking, because, right, if we know that our thoughts are 90 to 95% of our past, we have to do something different. We can't do the same model and the same method because it's going to yield the same results. We're probably going to miss something that we know is there, but don't know is there, if that makes sense. So if we engage in some type of writing, right, automatic writing, unconscious writing, you get to be present with yourself to begin to see, right, maybe old memories. What are some of those core beliefs from those memories? What did you not get in that moment that you can give yourself now? Right? There's tons of different ways that once you start to work with your own inner experience, there are tons of different ways for that to unfold and unravel. You just have to take the first step. And then from that first step, work with the process because the process itself will show you what is next. I wanted to put this down or share this because these are definitely some regularly suggested strategies. And I thought it was funny because when I was just doing some research, this stuff came up in Google, and I I just think it's interesting, right? How, again, culturally, we've been taught some of these things, but they're kind of watered down. And what I mean by that is, right, just to say like, oh, be mindful and aware, right? Like recognize and observe your thoughts without reacting immediately to them. Well, how do you do that? Right? You won't know the how to unless you know the things behind the how. So once you actually start, right, taking in information like this, oh, awareness and mindfulness gets to be so much easier now because I know what's operating. I know the how that I can get creative with the how to. Even, one of the other suggested pieces is consciously directing attention towards the desired outcome, right, rather than the fears. Well, that is great. And if that fear, again, right, is something from the past that is asking for your attention, it's an automatic unconscious programming, is the word I'll put in quotes. Wouldn't it be more advantageous to invite that in and begin to work with it to see the truth in it rather than continue to push it away? Because even continuing to push it away is going to reinforce the belief behind that to start with. Meaning, if there is a belief that I'm not good enough or I can't, right? There's a fixed mindset in that memory or in that fear, and we say, nope, it's still there. It's still going to be operating, right? So again, we can direct our attention elsewhere, but this is where shadow work and those elements of really allowing yourself to learn how to be with yourself and let the things come up so we can work with them in ways, not sit in them, but truthfully allow them in so that we can address this fear, remove what limitations are there, and literally let you be the cause of the effect that you seek. Um, Again, visualization and affirmation, these things are great. And a lot of mindfulness practices, I would say, in the way that they're taught in therapy, are not not the entirety of the practice. So a lot of times with mindfulness and visualization, right? Yes, it can help you align your mental state with your goals. But there are important things to do, like setting intentions, right? Or even when it comes to meditation, allowing yourself to potentially do some type of movement beforehand so you can welcome that meditation and that ease a little bit more. So just some considerations again that the how to comes after the knowing how. So rather than just taking the information, right, is something like this. If you're like, how do I do that? Can you begin a process of getting curious and learning how to so that the how to integrate comes after. And I just spoke on all that, so I'm going to skip that slide. Um, Perfect. We're really good on time. So we just have a couple more slides, but I just wanted to kind of give a quick little outline as far as a how-to based on some of the information from today. Again, this is not like a one size fits all, but I have found that a process like this in some way can be a good roadmap. But again, trusting your own intuition, trusting the responses as they come up, meaning you work with what's in front of you versus push them away to work with what you're told to do. Because again, just going back to that beginning piece, you are going to be the one that sees and understands your through line. You're going to be the one that sees and understands the theme that is underneath the set and setting rather than somebody outside of you. So ways to move from limitation to expansion, start by identifying what's the goal that you're seeking, right? Even as you write down the goal, is there a limitation within your goal? Right. A lot of people that I've worked with in a clinical sense, when I start working with them, have spoken to wanting to reduce anxiety. Even just that is a limitation because they're saying in some way, shape, or form, they want to keep the experience they're having. They just want less of it. What do you want instead? So again, if you can begin to see, right, even in the language of setting the goal, how are you limiting yourself? That's a great place to start. If you have a goal, right, that is a towards, that is more, expansive, begin to see what is limiting you. Is there a behavioral pattern, a thought pattern, an emotional pattern, a deeper belief system? Begin to invite discourse with that, right? Some type of dialogue, some type of exchange, not necessarily thinking, but through some type of other medium. Excuse me. Because when we invite that discourse, right, if we can recognize that our thinking is its own echo chamber, we have the ability then to engage in alternative activities like unconscious or automatic writing or talking out loud and writing or moving your body, right? Going for a walk while you talk, learning a new theme or topic, and then taking action on how you can incorporate that in your life. All of the things that are different opportunities you'll see, right? And there might be something that's not even in here that becomes part of how you invite that conversation with that pattern, right? Maybe you do something that's not even recommended because you find that it works for you, and that's beautiful, and that's the whole point. One of the things that I do love is Socratic questioning. So if you're trying to get to that, what is the limitation, the pattern, thought, the belief? Um, you can even just start with like, what's the thought that you're working with, right? What's the conscious thought? Excuse me, hypothetically, if I think X, what do I believe about myself? What do I believe about others? What do I believe about the world? You can ask questions like, what age does this feel like? Where did I see examples of this growing up? Does this align with the goal I'm seeking for myself? What is more aligned? Where do I see this truth in nature? Because I'm a part of nature, where do I see this in myself or my life, right? This more aligned aspect. What greater truths does this connect to, right? Again, truth, I use that word as a law that operates whether we know it exists or not. Where is there an opportunity for me to start taking action on that? What do I need to start? Um, and I have down here, I just wanted to share if it is helpful for context and experience that I had. I do some private trust learning and writing just on the side. And I'm working with a client right now, and we are in a rather challenging, stressful situation. A lot of it as I look back because I didn't set a very clear standard of deliverables, which that is my learning that I get to incorporate next time. But over the weekend, there was an email that I got very, I wouldn't say very early in the morning, but earlier than I would normally look at emails. And my partner was like, don't respond, just let it go. And I was like, no, I am. And I started to just type, and he's like, do not burn the bridge. And I was like, I'm burning the bridge. I don't care. And I stopped and I was like, I'm not going to burn the bridge. Let's go for a walk. And literally a day later, I was meditating and I literally was shown like based on a law that I believe in, right? There is, and it's a maxim law, but basically everything can be brought to equity, right? There's a remedy for absolutely everything. And I recognized in that moment, like, oh, there are other ways besides burning the bridge to show up and ask for this energetic alignment to be put back into place, right? So I share that example because there may just be things that in your experience come to you. And if you can work with them, right, it doesn't necessarily have to look always like pen and paper. But the one thing that I do recommend is until you can create that space in your head where you're in your own, like you don't identify as the mind and you can see the mind and you can see the things through a different set of eyes and curiosity, use pen and paper to start with. I used pen and paper for a few years until I was able to, and I still do from time to time, um, until I was able to develop that. Because if we're just thinking on something, right, we're probably just engaged in that 90 to 95% from the past. Um, so let's see, it looks like Yaz had to hop off. So for those, I'm just going to invite this as a little demonstration. Or I should say activity, excuse me, not even a demonstration. For those that feel called, I thought it would be interesting to set up Thursday's tapping as a opportunity to work with a belief system for the intention. So for those that watch this before Thursday, go ahead and, if there are even, doesn't even have to be limiting, let's just say, or negative, excuse me, maybe it's just a limiting thought process. Grab a pen and paper and just write down a couple limiting thoughts that you find yourself noticing in your mind and go back and engage in that hypothetically piece for a minute, right? To see if you start to identify some deeper core belief systems. If you do feel called, you can always go back to what is the goal that I'm seeking, right? Again, bring this into intention. What are you working on? What are you working with? Um, that goal is going to be different for everybody. But if you do feel called to identify some thoughts that you're noticing are limiting in your life and you want to change those, go ahead and engage in that hypothetical writing for, do that 3 to 5 times. Hypothetically, if I think this belief, what do I believe about myself? What do I believe about others? What do I believe about the world? Start with myself, write it out. If you find something in there and you're like, huh, that's interesting. I didn't know that was there. Hypothetically, if I think that, what do I believe about myself, right? You can keep bringing it to a deeper aspect if you would like. As far as myself, you can do that with others and you can do that with the world. Um, you can move through this entire example if you would like with those things, or, save one of those for Thursday's tapping, and that can be our well, it's going to be the intention, but it could be one of the beliefs that you work with for our Thursday class. So that is it for us today. Let me just make sure. Yeah, next week. So next week we're just going to wrap up. Can't believe next week is already week 9, but we're going to wrap up metabolic and energetic systems behind mental health. So again, just tying in all the various layers from the last weeks that we've learned. We are going to cover some other inputs, but we're also just going to see how all these inputs kind of dance together as well. If you guys have any questions, please reach out. You know how to get a hold of me. Otherwise, I will see you when I see you. Have a great day.